Go is on the screen here. We are ready to go with another edition of the program called What's Going On here on Plants Number One. Let's see here. We got to call this something different every week. This is Plants Number One broadcast from allpointstv.com. And so if anybody disputes that, come and see John. Don't come and see me. I want to finish up. I think I'm gonna be able to finish up today what we started last week, and I said that we would do part two this week, and hopefully we'll be able to finish with part two. We won't need a part three, but you never know. As I like to go off into some other areas sometimes to, I don't assume anything, and so sometimes I have to go off into other areas to bring other things into discussion and not assume that the knowledge base is the same for all people. I learned that in the classroom. You make an assumption that number one assumption you make is that the students have read the assignment. Don't always assume that, and then you assume that they understood what they read if they read the assignment. And these assumptions you have to kind of abide by, always trying to bring in some additional information that will fill it in the holes there in the void that is left by the lack of whatever the shortcoming is. Sometimes the shortcoming is just that people can read everything and not understand anything they read. And some people can read it and understand it, and you have to add to that understanding as well. It's like you have to balance different levels of understanding in the classroom. If you're not able to reach everybody in the room, you're going to have chaos in that classroom because the ones that don't feel involved are going to be the ones in the classroom tearing it up, keeping other students from being able to learn what they have to learn. So different, you have to think about that in terms of even preparing for this show. And I think we're going to do some things today for the scholars too, who don't know they're on different levels, but they are on different levels as well. And I keep listening to them, and I keep coming with this idea that I've always had in my presence here at the studio, and that is that the scholars need further tutoring as well. I don't think the scholars understand. I don't see any evidence they understand the Constitution, and that's. I know this sounds braggadocious, but that includes all of them. And I think what I'll be saying today will show proof of that, because I'm going to go back into. I'm going to also say a word or two about Alexander Hamilton, and where I think Alexander Hamilton's faux pas is, and his mistake in his understanding of what he created in terms of the Constitution. That is the idea of the Constitution has implied powers. And what I would say about even that with the great Alexander Hamilton, I do recognize that Hamilton was in fact great. I'm not sure he's the only one that deserves to have a play on Broadway of all the framers. I think Madison must be in there somewhere, although I don't think they'll ever have a play on Madison. I'd be very surprised if they did, because Madison Madison did not allow for this extension of the document as Hamilton did. Hamilton wanted to create the idea that the Constitution has implied powers. And I would agree with Hamilton on that, but I have to tell you something about even that statement about Hamilton. And Hamilton's problem, this is Moss speaking here. These scholars are not going to go along with me on this. They're not qualified to challenge it, but they won't go along with me on this. But Hamilton's shortcoming was that he saw implied powers, and I want you to listen to this point very carefully. He saw implied powers only by what was in fact stated, and since all languages are nuanced, there's always something implied in the stated language. But Implied powers is also, as I'm going to prove today in our part two, implied powers is that which does not need to be said because of what's already been said. And sometimes not what's been said in the area of the document that you are referencing, but in other parts of the document where certain things are stated that you can import into the area in which you are in fact uh, discussing the Constitution, because the point is made necessarily in the part that you're talking about, but another part of the document. We need to understand that is also part of the implications of the Constitution. I'm going to point it out in our discussion today. I think that we have to have a lot of appreciation for the framers of this country and celebrate them every day for the things that they did in that convention that turned into convention, because it really was not to be a convention where they are drafting a whole different document. They went there to they were enjoying to go there to clean up some of the things that the Constitution, another blind spot, that the Constitution did not. Those who wrote the Declaration, that was the Constitution at that point, as of 1781, that it had certain things in it that you couldn't have seen in 1781 that were problems and creating problematical situations. They had to be ironed out, and they sent them to the convention. They sent them to Philadelphia. They didn't send them to throw the document out, throw the articles out. They sent them there to do a revision based upon some of the flaws that had been picked up in terms of one of the big flaws in it was that it was so fearful of the federal government going out of control and central power being so concentrated in the federal government that it did not want the federal government to have the power to become a King George III. They had fought that battle, and that had been put to bed in 1783. They didn't want to have to go through that again. And so they went there with the idea of fixing the document, and had to come up with an idea of how to do what the articles intend to do, but do it in a different way in which it would not create the problems that were created by it doing it in the way in which it was in fact done. That was in fact not to let the federal government do anything. And of course, that's a problem because the government cannot act. Then how can you restrain individuals, for example, or groups of individuals who might go out of control? And you need to have the government able to act to stop that, because the government's overriding responsibility is to protect the citizenry over which they, in fact, are orchestrating the laws based upon the document and within the restraints of the document. They have to be able to act in a manner in which they are able to give um, security and safety, happiness, to the extent that it can do that, life, liberty, to the extent that government can do that. It cannot do all of it, but it can do certain things that help to contribute to it. It can contribute to um, the idea of life. You can do that by restraining the bully who might want to do harm to another person's life. You have to restrain that person. So that's part of it. And then liberty, you can do that by not passing laws that compel certain things into existence, that you now have the government become a liability to liberty, and it can certainly be that, because government is force. That's what Washington was stating. Government is force. And you have to recognize the force and back of government because they are the ones that are determining what is lawful and what is not lawful. And what is lawful sometimes is not always constitutional. We have to keep that in mind as we talk about the law and the Constitution. Sometimes see the division between those two because there's an ocean of space between that which is lawful and that which is constitutional. All things that are lawful are not constitutional. But they went there to fix the articles, not to throw it out. And in in when they got there, I think some went there. I think that it's clear that some of them went to the convention, went to what became a convention to. I think that's what Paul revealed. This is what I think it's what was meant when he said, "I smell a rat," and the rat was that some of them went there with an idea. People call me and they know my friends call me. They knew I'm doing the program at 2 o'clock. I'm gonna have to smack somebody. Uh, they, 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 they went there with the idea that we have to fix the document, but some of them went there with an underlying plan to do more than that. I don't. I think so. I think it's very clear that those plans that they went there with the Virginia plan, the Connecticut plan, they went there with certain plans that were already fully thought out, and I think that some went there to with the idea of replacement. And I think that's very clear. And if you read those papers very carefully, some went there with the idea of throwing this document out, throwing the articles out, and drafting a new document in its place. And that if you're doing something, sometimes you have to. How do I say this without sounding too dictatorial? Sometimes you have to go and do some things because some things that need to be done above the pay grade of the people on whose behalf you're doing it. And those persons at the convention were the best and the brightest that this country had at that point. They sent their best and brightest to Philadelphia. Alexander Hamilton is the best and brightest, one of the best and brightest there, and he certainly was the best and brightest of the members. I think five members that went from New York. I think only, I think Hamilton might have been the only one of the New York delegation that actually was there at the end. I mean, 55 showed up, but at the end, only 39 were there at the end of the convention. So sometimes, you have to, I don't think you have to do it this way, but sometimes what occurs is that you realize that you're making something needs to be done, and the lesser lights have to be brought along, sometimes dragged to it, to which in the end they will benefit. And that's a very arrogant assumption that is made, but I think that that's what has happened repeatedly in this country's history. Sometimes the people that are making those decisions, and they make it, and they sometimes get it wrong, but sometimes they're making these decisions with the idea because because these people are elitists, and they get the idea that they have to do this because they are um, the best and the brightest. What's that book called? The best. Who's the author of that book? The best and the brightest. But the best and the brightest, and you assume as an elite that some are just going to be brought dragging to the resolution of the problem. We'll not be able to figure out on their own, but will have to be brought there against their will. And sometimes you can't tell them that. Our governments do it all the time. They don't tell us what they're what some of the things that they're deciding and why they have decided that, because they don't share the information with the public. Some things are top secret, and some things, if we knew what they were doing, we would object to it. And that has some flaws in it too, in a democracy where the government is holding back information, which we need to have as free citizens, so we can help determine the the logistics involved in decisions being made, and then we could get more unanimity behind the supporting of the policies. We had a better understanding of it, but sometimes governments don't come clean, and they and we got a problem right now. You probably are noticing that we got a problem right now because I think that we're getting ready to see some people resigning in the Trump administration. I think we're getting ready to see something here as early as this week, because I don't think the tent is big enough right now with Pam Bundy and Cash Patel and Dan Bongino. I don't think the tent is big enough to hold all three of them. And somebody's going this week, and I don't think it's going to be Pam Bundy, because in order for Pam Bundy to go, then Donald Trump would have to be the one that would bring about the removal, because she is the head of the Department of Justice, and I don't think that Trump wants to make that move. Yet, by what Pam Bundy did last week, and you can go and read back in the time period, and go up to the day from that point, and read what happened. But there's some problems, there's some friction now in the administration, because they came in and joined the team because they believed in transparency. And now the government is not as transparent as some of the team members thought it would be. Cash Patel, I think, very much is on that. Is that's why he has his back up. And Bundino, that definitely is a problem for him, because his whole credibility is on the line. I don't think that he can stay based on what has occurred. I'm going to just watch. I'm still watching it like everybody else is doing, but do not be surprised if there are some resignations as quickly as, maybe as quickly as today. And I haven't heard anything about any decisions being made, but I would not be surprised if there are some people that are going to walk today. But sometimes government does things where it has an understanding of what it's doing, but doesn't share the understanding widely enough so everybody else will be invited into it, and have it on the same um, knowledge base as they have it. That reminds me, and I'm off my topic, but that reminds me of page 66 of this book by C.F. Bonet, the version of it that the English version of it that is on page 66 of that book, where Bonet is making this description of the priest class, and they are telling the people God has told them X, Y, and Z, and the multitude is asking them, well, why didn't God tell it to us? To which the priest class said, because God told us to tell you. To which the people then answered that we don't have it on the basis that you have it. You know it because you said God told you, but God didn't tell it to us. And so you know it and we don't know it based upon that particular authoritative source that you are claiming. And they kept going back and forth and back and forth. And finally, at the end of it, on page 66 of that book, Ruins of Empire, the priest class threw their hands up in the air, exasperated, and said, the people are enlightened. In other words, they're not buying it. That's where the elites operate. they have a certain, they assume a certain knowledge that they have, and they're making decisions based on that knowledge. And sometimes the knowledge is not shared because of the comeuppance it would create in terms of persons not going along with it. And sometimes it's because people think it's over their level of understanding. There's a lot of reasons why which goes into it. And you have to be aware of that when government's making the decisions, that you don't have all information, not privy to all of it. And so there are some things that are out of sight and out of mind. And people think, well, government is in fact out of control because we don't agree with what the government is doing. Well, you don't agree with what the government is doing based on what the government is shared with you about what it's doing and reason behind it. Some of that is the case. But I think in this case right here, don't be surprised if some people are walking today or walking before the week is over. I don't think that tent is big enough, President Trump, for all the team members. And there's some real problems in that team right now with Cash Patel, Pam Bundy, and Dan Bongino. There's some real problems, some real tensions in that administration right now. And I think we're going to see some people making a decision that's going to undo the apple cart. Now, Elon Musk is already gone. This idea that he made an apology and then now back in good graces, all of this man talking about, this man was so flabbergasted. He's now talking about a third party. He doesn't see any. He's certainly not going to become going over to the Democratic Party, and he doesn't have any room in the Republican Party outside of MAGA, and MAGA is Donald Trump. That's what MAGA is, and so he's talking about third party now, and I understand that too. But there is a real, take my word for it, there's a real problem that's blooming in that administration, and it's going to be interesting to watch and see how it's handled because you what you really want, because you're dealing with a internal enemy, an anti-American faction in this country that's in government, and it's been in government as an anti-American faction in government ever since Eisenhower. And somebody needs to go and read about that because they don't want you to read that in school, because that's why they have blacked out Joseph McCarthy's name. This man's a pariah in American history, but was he really wrong in the line of inquiry he was making about traitors in our government? No, he was in fact right on point. And there are people that are writing about it, going back and revisiting this because McCarthy was not wrong. McCarthy has been blacked out in history because McCarthy was right. We have communists in our government, and McCarthy was ferreting that out. And you can't tell me, I'm too much of a historian for you to tell me what you tell all these other people out here. You can't tell me the things you tell these other people out here. That George Washington invoked executive privilege. You can't say that. You can't say that to give me a break. You can't say that. George Washington did not invoke executive privilege. They think that they want to say that because George Washington was invoking when they asked for the communications that the government had that dealt with Jay's treaty. John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Marshall, the most dangerous of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, was number 4. And the most dangerous one of them, I'm saying that, and nobody else will agree with me on that point either, but they're not qualified to disagree with that point either. John, John Jay signed a very unpopular, that treaty was very unpopular because it sided with the British against the French. And the French had fought on our side during the Revolutionary War, and we fought against the British, and now he's making a treaty that favors the British and not the French that were our allies. That's what the problem is here. But George Washington did not invoke executive privilege. What he did was, when they demanded to know the papers that the government had in its archives that would explain the thinking of the government and making the decision that made in the treaty that John Jay was representing, because he's representing Washington and the others in that administration, Hamilton more so than any of his cabinet members, because Hamilton and Washington were on the same page pretty much on this one and on some of the other things as well. But Washington did not invoke, and they can't show me where he invoked executive privilege. What did he mention? Where was that? Where was that mentioned in prior to 1950s? Under Dwight David Eisenhower, who was elected in 1952, running against Adlai Stevenson, by the way, in both 52 and 56, in 52 and in the 56 election. Adlai Stevenson and Dwight Eisenhower ran against each other in 2 elections. That tells a lot, too, about how limited the pool of people are that are seen, viewed as being qualified. We don't have a lot of them, and the ones that put in there have not been all that great. But the pickings have been small, too. And look at how they're repeating these persons that are running more than running time after time after time, and finally getting it. That's what. Don't get me started. I'm on off. I don't want to do far. I got so much. I need to say so much about the topic, but there are certain things we get to understand about the history of the country, which we don't understand because it's not being taught. They're not teaching the history of this country. I made a comment last week, and nobody's going to challenge me on it. They don't agree with me on it, but they don't challenge me in public about it. And I said that the person should be on Mount Rushmore is not Abraham Lincoln. The person that should be on Mount Rushmore is Jefferson Davis. You think a scholar is going to come out there and say that? Say that in public? They're not going to say that, but that's true.
Let's see. Yeah, it was that Weaver wrote a book. Last name was Weaver. He's not Randy Weaver. He was this guy was a academic. He said, he basically said, the South was right about the states' rights, and it's like people want to attack that, but we have allowed the federal government to grab more of our rights away from us.
That's what they're saying, John. That's why Jefferson Davis belongs. I know they're not going to agree with me on this. They better not come out publicly and disagree. But I know you'd be surprised at how much I know about what they're saying in private. They said in private. I can tell by what they're saying in public, what they're saying in private.
Look at Robert Lee and all these other guys were more connected to their families. They actually fought for this country to be started than any other group of people in our country's history, our past. I mean, they have. I mean, they were connected to the founding of the republic.
That's a fact. And look at the names of the persons that were on the other side of that war and tell me who those persons are. Look at General Robert E. Lee. His father was Light Horse Harry Lee, the right-hand man of General George Washington. They rode together. His father was a member of the Revolutionary War, and what they're doing is refining that which they fought for at the time of the Revolution, and we have moved away from it, and they are now fighting for reclaiming the heritage that had gotten lost.
Let me add, too, my family fought on the Union side, and I'm saying this, so I'm not a white Southern family, I'm not from that. I just realize historical perspective. I know my family, I'm proud of what they did in a way, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The people in the South, if you just want to look at a legal issue and the legality and the Constitution, they're far greater on that side.
Yeah, and they were the constitutionalists. And that's why when they drew up their own constitution, all it was a replica of the document that had been ratified in 1787. The document wasn't ratified until the following year, but it was drafted in 1787 in Philadelphia. And what they were doing in the secession movement was that they were vacating a union that no longer represented a document had been created. That's what this fighting is about. They don't want to say that, but that's exactly true. They don't. You see, we got to get back. We have got to get back to the framers in this country. We don't have. There is no other salvation for this country unless they return to the framers, and that's what this war was really about. The secession movement was an attempt to return this country back to its source because it was moving away from the source and so on and so forth. But let me say what I came here to say. I can say all of that as well, but what I came here to say was this. There are certain when I said before that I'm the only one in the country that understands the Constitution of the United States, I'm not saying that lightly. I listen to these scholars, and I would tell these scholars this: you're not on this level. None of you. I wrote about today in my post. I'm calling names out. I'm not hiding behind any walls here. I don't have to hide. They're not going to challenge me in public. Not when I'm pointing out in public where the errors are and what you cannot say if you are what they're saying about you, and they're saying you're a constitutional scholar. If you're a scholar, you cannot say the things you're saying. Okay, here's the deal. I agree with Alexander Hamilton up to the point that Hamilton saw there were implied. Hamilton the one that created the idea of implied powers, but what he did in having created the idea of implied powers in the Constitution, he used it to expand the Constitution. I'm not using it for that purpose because there's another part of what Hamilton did not see, and I'm making a correction of Hamilton here. What Hamilton did not see is that the implied powers in the Constitution is not only from what is said in the language in the Constitution, where it implies some things because of what it says, but also implied powers, listen to this point very carefully, is also implied by what does not need to be said because of what the Constitution states. Think about that for a minute. For example, here's an example. You scholars listen carefully. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution says at the top of that section of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, it says Congress I'm going to read it because you're not going to, I don't want you to say that this is not in the document. I'm going to read it. So you will be able to read it yourself later on. But Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, let me go to that part there. It starts out though, and then it's just to repeat it in 18 different clauses that are found in Article 1, Section 8. But here's what it says. The Congress shall have power, and then it goes into delay and collect taxes and so on and so forth. And then in clause 11, it will say, it would be saying two from that point forward. And clause 11 says, to declare war. But I want you to see something here. I want you to see something very, 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 very important here. In Article 1, Section 1, listen to this very carefully. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. So if it has stated that in Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, all legislative powers, use plural there, powers, herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. So then, if that is stated in the Constitution, then why is it stated in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, Congress shall have power to declare war? Listen carefully, very carefully. Here's the reason why it says that. Because declaring war is not a legislative power, and it is stated because of what does not need to be stated. And what they made the mistake on is that they think that that language excludes the president from declaring war. You better listen, because I'm right and every scholar in this country is wrong. You see, it doesn't need to be stated the president can declare war, but it needs to be stated that Congress can do so because it is not a legislative part of the Congress of the United States. That's why it says they should have the power. But does it say this? Does it say, as it says in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5? I'll read that to you as well. Listen to this very carefully. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5. Listen carefully to this part right here. The House of Representatives shall choose their speaker, and this is part, and other officers, and shall have the sole power, SOLE, the sole power of impeachment. If the power of the legislative branch of government to declare war is a sole power, the Constitution has no problem stating it as such. And when it assigns sole power, it states it every time that is a sole power. It's a sole power in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5. It's a sole power also when it says in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6. I'll read that to you as well, and I want you to listen carefully as well. Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6. Let me read that. This is what it says in that respect. The Senate, Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. Does it say in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, that Congress has the sole power to declare war? No, it's that the language in the Constitution implies and doesn't have to be said the president can declare war, because the president is the commander in chief of the armed forces. And if he cannot, in fact, declare war, he is not the commander in chief. The Congress would be that. And they're not that because they don't take the inaugural oath of office. Not that office. The inaugural oath is for a lesser office. Here's the executive office holder, Article 2. I told you last week you had to stay in your lane. Here's what Article 2 says, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. The executive power shall be vested in a president. One person. Not 535. And for them to be ordering a president around, not only at the executive, at the federal level, but to have persons ordering the president around at a lesser than federal level, you know what? You almost want to get out there and begin to, that is such a outrageous action that's taken, that's being accepted as true, that you almost want to do what they did in 1861.
Can you recall, because you've been around longer than I have, we don't want to bring that up, but have you remembered any lower court doing what they're doing to Trump? I can't, I mean, I'm 62. Obviously, I didn't keep track of everything that went on, okay? Like Nixon era and stuff. I was pretty young yet at that point. But, you know, all the way through, I can't remember any lower courts doing what they're attempting to do with Trump.
It's unprecedented. John, it's unprecedented. The standard, I wrote about this today in that post, the standard today is that, and this is the standard the court seem to be using, these judges seem to be using, is that if Donald Trump says that this is in fact constitutional by him actually stating that, and they consider him to be an illegitimate president because he came out of a circumstance that never existed before he used a different circumstance and criteria to become president. I mean, the commander in chief, to become that, become the executive office holder of the United States, to become that, political experience, military experience, either one or the other or both. Donald Trump had neither, and he's done the unforgivable to break into their house now, in the house where the elite are. They're telling us what the law is. They're passing the laws above our pay grade. And this man comes and breaks in there without the standard that has been set through history and precedent. And this man comes in there and blows all that away, and shows through that the rejection of the ruling class, because all Donald Trump's presence in Washington right now has been a rejection of everybody's in Washington. Everybody's in Washington right now. Donald Trump stands up as a contradiction to that, because never before have we had a president that came through that circumstance where his reliance is totally upon the people. That's why he has to be so much better at representing the country, because he doesn't have any allies in Washington. Is that true? He doesn't have any allies in Washington. There are no allies this president has in Washington, D.C., not in the Republican Party and not in the Democratic Party, certainly not in the Democratic Party, who wouldn't clap not one time for the man having spoken before a joint session of Congress and spoke for more than an hour, and not one Democrat applauded one time, not even John Fetterman, who's the most sane one over there in the Democratic Party. Not one Democrat clapped for a single thing the man said. That's also unprecedented. You can't find not one thing that we have in common that you can clap for the President of the United States speaking as the office holder over the entire country, and you can't find one thing to agree with the president on. No, of course not, because if Donald Trump says they disagree, and that's also what the court is doing.
John Lithgow, you know, the actor Lithgow, said about Hollywood is basically like high school with lots of money. I see that with Congress. Basically, don't you dare like say anything, clap at anything he says, or you're not going to be invited to our parties. That's right. What it is. You know,
John, that's what they're doing. we got people, we got scoundrels that running traitors running our government. It's been exponentially expanded since the McCarthy period, but they are there now in droves, and that's what uh, um, the general that was in the Congress, he was just too out front to stay there. He was from Florida, but Florida is pretty good, but they got some dean bats from Florida in there too. Uh, Look at some of the people that sent there from Florida. They're not all in the one. I can't think of that general's name that had a seat there, but they also had Alcee Hastings there before he passed away, and look at what he was doing in there. So it's not all 100% where every district is, in fact, sending people there that represent the constituency and so on and so forth. Some dean has been put there from Florida as well, although Florida probably is the freest and most I say you say the freest. Well, it's probably the most clear-minded state that we have right now. I'm not all that happy with the governor having challenged, really getting behind Trump and all that, challenging him in the primary and trying to wrestle control from that. That's unforgivable and so on and so forth. And I think we need to look at that as the man has ambitions in the future. I don't know if we can trust this man, but that's George Moss speaking. But I will tell you that we got some rats, some traitors in our Congress. And Joseph McCarthy pointed that out back in the 50s, and that's why Eisenhower would not let the members of his administration go there and testify before Congress because they had a lot of baggage out, and Eisenhower was aware of it and had talked about it, by the way, on the 17th of January of 1961, and exiting out of the presidency 3 days later. 3 days before he did that, he gave that speech that you all remember from the fact he talked about the military industrial complex. But what he was saying in that speech there is that we have to be very vigilant about something happening that was now rearing up in the government that Eisenhower was aware of because they were in his administration. And he had reared up under the administration of Harry S. Truman as well when he set up the CIA in 47. And look at what occurred when Eisenhower pointed out on his way out of the office, and 2 years later, look what happened in Dallas. When a hit was put on John F. Kennedy by that state that was budging up under Eisenhower and had bloomed up 2 years later to the point where it's a force all unto itself. It's a force unto itself right now. It's a force to be reckoned with right now. And when we talk about the deep state, let's be very honest about what we're talking about here, because the deep state is the government operating outside of the parameters of that which is legal and constitutional in this country. It's not just people in the shadows wearing cloaks and the way we imagine in the Pink Panther and stuff like that. It's some folks that's operating in the back of the booth in the dark, and what they're doing is extra legal because they are doing it because they're part of the government and so on and so forth. I would tell you this: you need to go back and look at those Dulles brothers. Allen Dulles, the former director of the CIA at the time that Kennedy is president, and the person that Kennedy fired after the Bay of Pigs invasion. He fired Dulles. And then look at somebody putting Dulles on the investigation of the death of the man who had fired him when Kennedy was killed. Dulles is serving there behind the scenes as the director of that report. You can say it was Earl Warren if you want to. Earl Warren did not, he put his name on the report. Earl Warren didn't have the time to be sitting over there and be over the Supreme Court and then monitor that investigation at the same time. He did not, in fact, monitor that. They put his name on there because he's Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Earl Warren allowed himself to be used in the Warren report. the so-called Warren Report. This is the Allen Dulles report. This is a CIA report. The CIA wrote his own report and exonerated itself from any wrongdoing in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I'm saying that on the air, and there's no scholar going to say anything other than what I'm saying on the air. They're not qualified. I'm just telling you, not qualified. They're not going to challenge me in public. All their challenge is private. And I know what they're saying in private back because I can tell what they're saying by what is happening in public. They're going to say anything public about it because they're not qualified to do that. None of them. Alan Dershowitz, none of them. Alan Dershowitz doesn't know anything about the Constitution of the United States. And neither does John Yoo. Now, I notice they keep going back and forth from one to the other, and they bring one or two on there and repeat themselves over and over again using the same people. They're not going to bring. I said this last week, and I stand by it. They're not going to bring on there the author of this book, Kevin Guzman, JD and PhD, and wrote this book called The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Constitution. He's not going to be on television. When have you seen him on TV? It's Dershowitz, John Yoo, and they go back and forth. They might have Sean on there, Schoen, the attorney on there. These are very safe people to bring on TV. This license in all the networks have to be licensed by the FCC, so they have a certain hold over who the yes can be. They can't bring person on there, the Wild Bill Hickok type of people that are more scattered in terms of their understanding of the document better than is understood by these persons talking about it. Don't understand it, but they talk about it. They don't have an understanding of the Constitution of the United States. And they're not going to say and they're not qualified to say what I'm saying about it. The implied powers of Alexander Hamilton, I'm saying here, is that Hamilton's blind spot, there are implied powers, because the language is not so straightforward, and it can never be so lacking in nuance that it speaks directly and nothing can be implied from it. But what Hamilton didn't see, and what I'm saying is one of the spots that was outside of his understanding of implied powers, is that the Constitution also has implied powers by what does not need to be said. It's assumed, that is, say, it's implicit that the President of the United States has the power to declare war. It's not implicit that Congress can do it. Why? Because it's not a legislative power that's asserted for the legislative branch of government in Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution. That's the fact. That is say that it doesn't say it's exclusive power. It's not exclusive. It's addition to. What is it addition to? It's an addition to the legislative powers that the legislative branch of government has by Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution of the United States. That's as true as rain. If it says all legislative power is vested in the Congress of the United States, then why is it repetitively saying in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, that the Congress shall have the power to declare war? It doesn't say exclusive power, but it has the power to declare war because it's an addition to the legislative power. You're not passing a law here. You're declaring war. But the scholars think that power is exclusively given to the Congress, and because it states it without understanding why it states it. It's because it's adding to what is already expressed in Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution. That's what I'm saying. And what do you scholars say? I tell you what you better say. you better shut up, because you're embarrassing yourself out here saying things like, I said this in my post today, the president, that you have to have treason, bribery, other high crimes and misdemeanors in order to bring about the impeachment of a federal office holder. Everybody, they all say that, but none of them can show it to me in the Constitution. Not one of them. They can't show it to me because it's not in there. Because that's not the standard for impeachment. And they don't agree with that, but I tell you this, they better not come out in public and say it. That standard does not exist for impeachment. The standard for impeachment is the majority of the members of Congress, and there are four, not in Congress, but in the House, since the House has the sole power of impeachment in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5. Because of that, the House has the sole power to bring about impeachment. But impeachment is not removal. That's what I'm when I hear them speaking about impeachment, is they don't even understand that impeachment is not about removal. You don't need to go down the lane of removal because you impeach. You can just do that as a way of hitting a person on the wrist and tell them you're not going to do that, because there's some trouble down the road if you do it. If you continue to act in this way. See, the impeachment to impeach a president is also to put him on notice, because only men have been president, put him on notice that this is a problem area for you. It could be like a notification. It's like that white envelope sent to the president. But it wasn't until Schumer, being defiant as he was, did this, where they sent an impeachment over to the House. The House sent an impeachment over to the Senate, and Schumer failed to allow it to go to the floor. It did not go to the floor. It was killed at the House level. They referred it over there, but did you notice that they did not, in fact, have a trial in the Senate? That's what I had already said, that you can impeach without having a trial, because there's two different bodies here. The House cannot try it in the Senate. They can send it to the Senate to see what the Senate has to say about it. But Schumer bottled it up, and it never came out of on the floor of the Senate for a vote. So the idea that you're going to vote upon that impeachment, I'm talking about the one that I'm not talking about when they were talking about impeaching Trump twice. I'm talking about when they sent impeachment over there, and Schumer bottled it up because he disagreed with what the House did. So in the Senate, it died in the Senate. The two made up potential impeachment on Donald Trump went to the Senate for trial. He was tried twice in the Senate. The second time they tried him in the Senate was the 13th of January of 2020. They thought that he'd be leaving office in another 7 days. So he would be weaker, and they thought that they could get the members of the members in the Senate that were Republicans on the fence, because they don't like Trump either, to be honest with you. He's a problem for them too, a handful for them. They thought that they would come out of the woodwork because they thought they'd cancel this man. He's gone. 7 days, we won't deal with him anymore. He won't be able to come back. We'll close the door if he gets out, and then we'll be able to move on impeaching and then convict him and then stop him under Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. We'll be able to stop him by the conviction, where we can then pass a resolution in the Senate that barred from ever holding federal office again. That was the intent of that second impeachment. Really, of the second trial, I should say. because by the time the second trial was actually held, Donald Trump was out of office at that point. But you see, you can, as long as you got the impeachment passed before he leaves office, you can have the trial after he leaves office, but the impeachment must take place while he's in office. That's a requirement. I'm saying that I don't care what they say; they're not going to publicly contradict what I'm saying here. That's the rule. That's the law. That's the Constitution. They thought they had him. They would be able to get a conviction. They wanted to stop him from ever coming back again, as he did come back in '47. They didn't intend to have that happen. They knew that the people were in back of him, and that's what they fear: the people being in back of a candidate. They want to be the arbiter of that. They want to be the power center. They don't want the power in the hands of the people, and that's what the framers were trying to making sure they're done by creating the ninth. You see, the amendments in the Constitution were to put the power in the hands of the American people. We, the people of the United States. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. That was the assignment for the American people, and they need to take the bull by the horn and carry out their responsibility as citizens of the United States and stop handing it over to people that intend to do them harm, because the politicians in Washington are not on our side. They prove that every day. They're not on our side. Look at how they're treating the American citizens. Look what they're doing for the ones who are coming here illegal. They're trying to say they're citizens of the United States by having children born on the soil. The children are automatically citizens. How could that even be contemplated? And a point of them in Washington right now trying to come up with how they can finesse that, because they're afraid to come out there and make that ruling when the Constitution is very clear that you cannot do that. So they're trying to wrestle with how they're going to get around the Constitution, but it's clear they cannot do it. The logic of it, you can see, is not on their side either, because if you're not a citizen of the country, how can you have children in the country who are not illegal if the parents are illegal? How are they not illegal? Just because the soil, the birth on the land does not assign citizenship. What assigns citizenship on the land is that if the parents are citizens of the land, then the citizenship on the land is assigned because of the parents. The parents are citizens, therefore the children are citizens. The Constitution was very clear in doing that by what it says in article in the 14th Amendment. Is very clear about that because it puts that caveat in there. Let me read that to you in the 14th Amendment. It's in the document. You don't have to make it up. It's right there in the document for anybody that wants to read it. It does not read this way. They want to act like it reads this way, but it does not read this way. It does not say all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. It does not say that. It does not say all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. It puts a caveat in between them, between those two statements. And it says this instead: all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And that part, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, is put there to exclude immigrants, ambassadors of other countries, and so on and so forth. That's all excluded. You have people in this country that have children who are not citizens because of that caveat in that language. And the caveat is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Would you agree with me that the people that are here as ambassadors of other countries, they're not subject to the jurisdiction thereof? There are jurisdictions, the government that sent them here. There is jurisdiction. but the jurisdiction of those persons that are here as ambassadors of the country that sent them here. And when I was out of the country and I had a problem getting back to the United States, I had to go to my embassy, the American embassy, where my jurisdiction was, where the government there had my jurisdiction was there of that government. My own government was the United States. I'm not confused about it when I go to Africa. There are 53 countries in 53 countries in Africa, and I don't have citizenship in either one of them. My jurisdiction is the United States of America. That's my country, and that's why I had to go and to my embassy to rectify the problem I was having outside the country, because I could not have gotten back here to the United States unless I had, in fact, had an intervention, and I went to the embassy in order to bring that about. So the main point I'm making here is that when it comes down to who has the power in the federal government, each branch of government has the power in the federal government in its domain. And when there's something outside of the domain that it has power in, as in the case of the legislative branch of government declaring war, it says that because that's an addition to, and that's why it's in there for the legislative branch of government. It's not there to exclude that which is implied in the executive branch of government, the president of the United States having the power to declare war. It does not exclude the president from doing that, because it does not give exclusive power to declare war to the legislative branch of government. You don't see that in the document. The president can declare war also. And all you scholars that don't agree with me with that, come out in public and say it. That I dare you to do. Okay, you got to get out of here again. Want you to follow your dream to next week. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.